You do not wake up to a clock. You wake up to a body that already has a list. Warmth, water, food, people. That is the real shape of most ancient days. Not a nonstop chase, not a war movie, not a life lived at the edge of panic every second. The average day was built from repeated small actions that kept a group alive long enough to do the same thing tomorrow. Does that sound less dramatic than you expected? It should. Ancient life was hard, but hard is not the same as chaotic. Richard Lee's classic work with the Jew Huanzi in the Kalahari is a good place to start. He spent years observing how a foraging society actually used its time. The result did not look like a civilization of people sprinting from one emergency to the next. It looked like a schedule made of short bursts of labor, social time, and shared responsibility. People searched for food, but they also rested. They talked. They repaired tools. They watched children. They moved with purpose, not panic. What changes in your mind when you realize that? This is where the morning begins. Someone checks the embers. Someone rebuilds the fire if it has gone low. Someone looks at the weather and the ground and decides whether the day is for gathering, tracking, repairing, or staying close to camp. Another person may collect water. Another may pull plant foods from storage or start processing what was gathered yesterday. None of it looks cinematic, but it is the real machinery of survival. A group that ignored these boring tasks would not last long enough to become history. So why do we keep picturing ancient humans as if every minute was a chase? Then there is food, not just hunting. Food is cutting, pounding, drying, soaking, grinding, roasting, sharing, and packing away. In many hunter-gatherer societies, the work is spread across the day instead of stacked into one office-style block. That matters. A person does not need to spend all day hunting to make dinner happen. They need knowledge, they need timing, they need a group. They need to know which plants are edible, which are seasonal, which roots store energy, which tracks are fresh, and which route gets you home before the light fails. Ancient life was not a hunt for calories alone. It was a system for turning a landscape into a meal. That system had children in it. Lots of them. And children were not separate from life. They were inside it. They learned by watching, copying, carrying small things, asking questions, failing, trying again, and listening to older people explain what the wind meant or where the berries grew, or why a trail suddenly stopped. Sarah Hurdy's work on cooperative breeding helps explain why this matters. Human children are expensive, slow to mature, and deeply dependent on a wider circle than just one parent. Ancient human daily life therefore included care, not as an interruption, but as a core task. If you remove childcare from the picture, you do not get the full picture of a day. You get a fake one, and by midday the day shifts again. Some people keep moving, some stop. Heat, hunger, and terrain all matter. A good strategy in the wrong weather is still a bad strategy. In many environments, the smartest thing is not to push harder, but to wait, rest, and save energy for the next useful move. That is not laziness, it is intelligence. A body that burns out early is a body that does not pass on its knowledge. Polly Weissner's work on Zhu Huanzi campfire conversation shows how important the evening could be. When the day work was done and the fire came up, speech changed. Storytelling increased, teaching increased, social bonding increased. The fire was not just a cooking tool, it was a social technology. Around the fire, people did not only eat, they negotiated, joked, warned, remembered, corrected, and planned. If the daytime was about keeping the body going, the evening was about keeping the group coherent. How else would a small band survive drought, conflict, illness, or bad luck? That social world left traces. At Blombos Cave in South Africa, archaeologists found evidence of early symbolic behavior and organized tool use. At Sibudu Cave, they found signs of plant processing, fire use, and bedding. Those sites do not show a society that was surviving on instinct alone. They show planning. They show memory. They show people creating spaces for work, rest, and safety. A cave floor with bedding is not glamorous, but it tells you that ancient humans understood comfort. A prepared surface, a controlled fire, a worn tool, a processed plant fiber. These are not side details. They are the footprint of an ordinary day. And ordinary days are where the truth lives. The truth is that ancient humans were not waiting around for a miracle. They were constantly solving tiny problems before those problems became huge ones. A frayed strap, a dull edge, a hungry child, a change in weather, a missing piece of information, a bad route, a late return, a fire that died, a pot that cracked, a cousin who needed help. The day was full, but full in a human way, not a modern calendar way. There was no office, no commute, no email, but there was structure, obligation, and a deep awareness that everyone depended on everyone else. That is the counterintuitive part. Ancient life was not simpler because it was easy. It was simpler because the boundaries between life and work were thinner. You did not leave home to become a worker and return home to become a parent or a friend. The work was the living. The living was the work. Food gathering, childcare, tool repair, storytelling, and social repair all happened in the same shared world. What looks to us like doing many things at once was, to them, just normal life. Every landscape wrote a different version of the day. Coastal bands had to read tides and shellfish timing. Forest groups had to track seasons and animal routes. Desert groups had to watch water holes and remember distances that would terrify a modern commuter. James Woodburn's idea of immediate return economies helps explain why many foraging groups avoided heavy storage and rigid hierarchy. They could not afford a calendar that treated food like a paycheck. They needed flexibility. They needed memory. They needed to keep moving with the environment instead of trying to control it. At places like Clayce's Rivermouth and other coastal sites, humans were already learning how to use predictable resources in a predictable world. That means some days were less about drama and more about timing. Timing the tide, timing the season, timing the fire, timing the return home. The smartest ancient person in the group was not always the strongest. It was often the one who remembered where the good plants grew, who knew which clouds meant rain, and who could tell the difference between a useful delay and a dangerous one. That is why memory mattered so much. Ancient life was full of information work, even if nobody called it that. You had to remember where the good roots were, when the fruit ripened, which elder knew the right story, which child wandered too far, which path stayed dry after rain, and which sound meant animals were near. Your day was made of decisions, and most of those decisions were built from things you had seen before. The past lived inside the present. That is what knowledge was. Modern life can make that hard to see. Your day is sliced into meetings, messages, tasks, alerts, errands, appointments, and notifications. It feels as if you are always behind. But that feeling is partly the design of fragmentation. Ancient humans had pressures too, but their pressures were woven into a single environment. Your brain still wants that shape. It still wants clear priorities, visible people, and work that ends when the sun goes down. Instead, it gets screens. It gets interruptions. It gets abstract obligations that never fully leave. No wonder your day feels heavier than it looks on paper. None of this means every ancient day felt calm. A drought could shrink the menu. An injury could change the whole work pattern. A bad season could force a group to travel farther than anyone wanted. But the answer to stress was rarely individual optimization. It was coordination. It was memory. It was shared labor. That is why the archaeological record matters so much. At sites like Sibudu and Blombos, repeated layers show people returning, reusing, repairing, and planning across time. They were not chasing novelty. They were building continuity. When the world is unstable, routine becomes shelter. So when you ask what ancient humans did all day, the honest answer is not that they survived. The honest answer is that they built a world small enough to inhabit together. They shared food. They kept fire. They watched children. They repaired tools. They read weather. They told stories. They made tomorrow easier by treating today as a shared responsibility. That is not a primitive version of your life. It is your life, stripped down to the parts that never stopped mattering. You do not wake up to a clock. You wake up to a life that is already in motion.